favorite people that I've ever worked with. And I'm just going to tell his story. It says a little girl kind of led this guy to Christ, and she was 6 years old. Her name is Rebecca. And Rebecca was an amazing kid, but her favorite thing, she went to a Christian school, and her favorite thing was to go and get hot chocolate every morning before she went to school. So her mom would take her in to get some hot chocolate, and she loved it, and then she would go to school. And so one day she's going into Starbucks. I think her mom must have got decaf, I don't know. But going into Starbucks, and she walked in, and she's just, she's 6 years old, she's just having an incredible time, and she looks over, and there's a crazy looking guy. She said, "Hey Mom, look at that guy." And her mom was devastated, like, "What do you mean, look at that guy?" I said, no, look at that guy. And she said, "He's got stuff stuck all over his face." And her mom looked up at him, and he had 15 facial piercings. So I'm not going to talk about his ears yet, just his face, 15. And so for all of the kids in the audience, where do you think those piercings were? Eyes, nose, lips, tongue. He had metal sticking through his nose and out both sides. If you hugged him, you would stick to his face. I mean, he just had metal everywhere. And she's like, "Look at him!" And his mom is saying, "Shh, don't do that." And then when she looked at him, especially when they look like serial killers, don't do it. And so, but she couldn't stop it. She's like, but. Look at him. And so finally, she got taken outside, and she got into trouble because it was like, you can't point at people like that, even when they look like that. Don't do it. And she said, "But Mom, why did he do that?" And her mom said, "I don't know." "What do you mean you don't know? Somebody's got to know. Did you see him, And she could not get over it. So finally, her mom said, "Next time we go in, even if he's there, I don't want you to point at him." And she thought, okay. And they walked into Starbucks, and she could not stop looking like, where is he? Oh, Mom, look at his head. Someone colored all over his head. And he had this dragon on his head with the nails of the dragon looked like it was pulling his scalp open. And it all the way had a dragon starting here, down his arms, literally coming out his hands. I mean, he was covered. And she said, "Somebody colored all over him, Mom, look." And she said the same thing. Shh. You can't do that. You can't look at people like that. And she's like, but Mom, did you see him? Look at him, And she just couldn't believe that her mom was not as excited about this whole thing as she was, And then they went in and got their hot chocolate, all that stuff. She again got just, you can't do that. You can't point across the room. And so the next time her mom said, "If we come in again and you do that, we will never come back here." "Well, what about my hot chocolate?" And she was serious, like, never, we won't come back here. And so the next time she went in, she held her face. "I'm not going to look. I'm not going to look. I'm not going to look. I'm not." And he waved back at her, and she's like, "Wow!" And she's trying not to say anything, but she's so excited. And so Shauna is her mom. They go to my church, but Shauna's her mom. And her mom was out getting the hot chocolate and whatever she drinks. And her girlfriend came up. And their girlfriend came up, and they started talking. And they started talking like, you guys split up. I'm so sorry. That was so tough. And they got into this serious conversation about some emotional family stuff. And Shauna let go of Rebecca's hand. And Rebecca just went back a little bit and said, "Man, look at you. Oh my goodness. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Did this hurt? No, let me say it. Did this hurt?" And she literally looked at everything. Jim said it did hurt. These are called tattoos. These are piercings. She counted that he had 8 earrings in one ear, 9 in the other ear. And she just asked she asked him exactly what she asked her mom. Why did you do that? And you know what he said? I don't know. Like somebody should know that, you know. But anyhow, so as Shauna was out getting the hot chocolate and talking to her friend, she realized that her daughter was not there. And she looked up like, I don't want to look. I know exactly where this kid is going to be. And so she finally looked over, and her beautiful little 6-year-old has this guy's head in her hand, and she's having the best time, right? And she's like, I didn't know what to do. I wanted to scream at him. Like, don't let little kids grab your head like that. What is wrong with you? And she said, I wanted to scream, and I wanted to discipline him. I wanted to tell her that's not right, and she's angry at everybody. And then she just felt like God said, take a breath. Just take a breath, it's okay. And she watched for a little while and watched what was happening. And then Rebecca said, all of a sudden, I thought, I wonder what my mom's doing. And she was afraid to look. She knew she's going to be in such trouble. And she looked up, and her mom was looking at her, and she was looking at her mom, and they just kind of smiled. And so Rebecca said, Mom, this is Tattoo Jim. They call him that because these are tattoos. And he doesn't know why he did it. And so she's telling him all that kind of stuff. Shauna said, hi, Jim. Jim said, hi, Shauna. They started to become friends. Like when they walked in, they said hi to Jim. He was there every time. And he was there every time drawing pictures. And he would draw the darkest, kind of creepiest pictures, bloodshot eyes, dragons. I mean, he just liked to draw, and he was pretty good at it. And he drank espresso by the gallon, you know. And so more than likely he's been up partying and using, and during the day he just kind of hangs around at Starbucks in the morning. And so anyhow, so every time they came in, they said hi. One time they came in, and Shauna said to Rebecca, tell Jim that you'll see him in 2 weeks. And Shauna says, 2 weeks? Why is that? Well, we're going to Grandma's for Christmas. And she thought for a minute, and she said, I'm not going this year, Mom. What do you mean you're not going this year? I'm not going this year. You're going this year, so tell Jim you'll see him in 2 weeks. She said, no, I'm not going this year. I can't go this year, Mom, I can't go this year. And her whole chin starts to quiver. And her mom's like, you love your grandma. I know, but I just can't go this year. So Jim is sitting there, he doesn't know what to do. Rebecca's starting to just cry. She looks like she's going to lose it at any minute. And then Shauna's trying to just have this kind of exchange happen. So finally she starts crying loud, like she's just crying. And Shauna says, what's the matter? She said, Mom, we can't go because who's going to spend Christmas with Jim? And Jim said, I'll be okay. And Rebecca, she's real insightful, says, you're not going to be okay. You know, and then Shauna says, well, Jim has his own family. And Rebecca says, I don't think he has a family. And so they just have this kind of falling apart. Jim is trying to make it okay. Rebecca's crying. Shauna's trying to intervene. And finally they leave. And when they get outside, Rebecca says, Mom, can we at least get him a Christmas present? And so they said, yeah, so they go down to the store, they get a Christmas present. Rebecca tries to wrap it. She's 6 years old. You know, she wraps it kind of good, but she doesn't really do a great job. And she comes back to Starbucks and she runs in and she says, Jim, I have a present for you. And Jim said the craziest thing that kids hear. Well, why did you do that? Why did I do what? You didn't have to give me a present. She said, it's a present. Just take it. And she gives him the present, and then what do you think she says? Because he's now holding the present. Open it. And he doesn't know how to open it. He's just like, I don't know why you got me this. And he just got really awkward about it. And she finally said, again, open it. It's a present. And he stood up and he opened it, and it was a brand new mechanical pencil for him to draw with, because his was pretty trashed. And so she got him this really beautiful pencil, and he teared up. And this little 6-year-old, I love her, she's so adorable. She said, he teared up and she said, Jim, do you know who Jesus is? And if I read you, would it scare you? You think?
I probably.
Okay, can I grab you?
Yeah.
So she said, Jim, do you know who Jesus is? And Jim said, not even thinking, he just grabbed her and lifted her right in the air. And he said, I hate God. I hate God. Don't talk to me about God. Don't talk to me. And he just lost it and literally has his kid kind of off the ground. And then he sees her so afraid. And he thought, I'm so sorry. No, I don't know who God is. I don't know who Jesus is. And he said, I'm so sorry. And in his mind, I talked to him later, he said he wanted to slam her into a wall. He was so angry. But he got it together and he just said, I'm sorry, I don't know who Jesus is. And she said, you know, I'm going away for 2 weeks. And someday I hope you find out who God is. And that's all she said, this little girl. So she goes to her grandma's house. She said, I have never done this ever. But every day I prayed for Jim. Every day. But one day, has anybody heard God answer your prayer? Well, you know, not a voice, but you know that God just gave you something. At 6 years old, she said, one day, Cheri, God told me exactly what to tell Jim. And so I told my mom, we have to go home. My mom said, no, we're staying for how long? 2 weeks. So no, I have to go home. I think God told me what to tell Jim. And Sean was like, 2 weeks, we're staying for 2 weeks. Here's a calendar, start marking off the days. We'll be gone in 2 weeks. And so at the end of 2 weeks, they get home. What was crazy for her is it wasn't a school day, so they didn't go to Starbucks. And it's like, wait, we got to go down there. But anyhow, the next school day, they walk in, she looks around, and she says, Jim, I prayed for you every day. And you know what God said? You need to go over to Cheri's house because she likes people like you. And then she sent Jim to my house. He walked into my house. And so we're going to slip from the children's story to the sermon, okay? So you guys don't have to act like kids anymore, act like grown-ups. But anyhow, so she sends them over to my house, and I'm in my office. And it's just my house, so it's just a home office. And I'm in my office, and I'm doing something, and I hear this behind me, hey, dude. And I thought, dude. I don't know the last time somebody walked in and called me a dude, you know? So I turned around and there was a guy covered with piercings, covered with tattoos and a leather thing, looking angry as can be. And he said, I was told that you could help me. And I thought, how funny is this? And when I turned around, he's the first guy that my husband ever said, are you safe? Are you safe working with him? But I turned around and I said, help you with what, you know? And he said, you know, I've got some drug issues, I've got some anger issues and that kind of thing, and I need some help. And I said, you know, yeah. And he said, one thing I want you to know, though, I don't want you to talk to me about God. I don't want anything to do. And he used some colorful language. And so I said to him, somebody sent you here as a joke because I am all about that. I love God. I don't think that I would have been in recovery for a day without the help of God. I don't think I would have gotten a year, and now I've got 35 years. I have a life that is so amazing because I believe that I have a higher power, or Jesus Christ that loves me and has taken care of me. So I'm looking at this guy that's just arguing, you know, I don't want any of that. I said, son, it's a joke. And the whole time God is saying, you're going to work with this guy. He was so obnoxious, it was crazy. I had a woman that I was working with. She had just buried her 22-year-old son. And he died of methamphetamines, but it really destroyed his heart. It took him a while to get to the point where his heart was failing. It was so bad they put him on the heart transplant list. He was going to get workups all the time. He was really hospitalized a lot of times. He would sneak out of the hospital and go get high. And then they would go back to the hospital. The doctors would tell her, we cannot give him a heart because he's using still. He's not a candidate. And she would beg them, if you don't help him, he will die, please. And she would talk him into putting him right back on that heart transplant thing. It got to the point where he was so bad that they knew he was going to die. He wasn't going to get a heart. And he told his mom, you need to take me home. I don't want to die here at the hospital. And so she went and took him home, scared to death. What do you do when you know that your child is going to take his last breath any minute? And so she took him home and she just held him. She said, I held him and we talked about everything. You know, where the drugs had led him, he was dealing for a while, all of that kind of stuff. I wanted to hold him and protect him from the devil himself. If you are going to die, you are going to die at home, and you're going to die surrounded by your mom and people who love you. And when he died, she said, I couldn't let him go because I didn't want him to have, the devil to have access to him, even right now. So she held him for a long time. And then they had to call the coroner. And the coroner came, they have a gurney, and they put her son on a gurney. And when they put him on a gurney, they have to zip him up. You can't take a body out without putting him in that black bag. And they zipped him up, and she said it was like somebody had a mic to the zipper. It was so loud. And as they came around his head to zip him up, she just started screaming, my son is afraid of the dark, and you cannot zip that around his face. And the guy looked at her and he said, your son is dead. And she said, you are not going to put that around his face. And of course they waited another hour or so before they could get her to agree to put that bag, zip it up and take him out. And so when I was working with Jim, when Jim was first there, Chris Chapman is her name, her son's name is Lance. I was working with Chris, and Chris would come over and have to process some of that stuff with her son. She had to bury him. She tried to shoot herself after he died. She felt like that she had been in the grave with him for a year. It was a horrible, horrible recovery. And she would talk to us and she would cry. And Jim would be going like, are you going to cry all day long? And I thought, really? Did he just say that? And he said, you know what? You just can't whine about this forever. And I would say, Jim, stop. You know, he was just so, he was obnoxious. He was so insensitive. We're going to an outreach one time, and God tells me to take Jim. And she starts crying, and his face gets on her. Like, we've heard all that. We've heard all that. You got to get over that. I wanted to open the car and just kick him out onto the freeway. And as an evangelist, I don't think we're allowed to do that, but I wanted to watch him like bounce down the road. It was so intense. We get to the outreach, and I am doing a thing with probation officers and judges, and so we had a whole room of kind of federal people, and so I went up and told my story. Chris told her story. Jim's going to get up and say something. And in that setting, he did pretty well with that setting. Then we ended up meeting a woman, and this woman said, can I work with you? And she's had some really intense disability. She wasn't making a lot of sense. She wasn't clear. She had facial scarring. It looks like maybe she had a serious stroke at one point. And she wasn't, even physically, she wasn't, she was limping and she had difficulty walking and stuff. And I said, usually when we travel, we have a team. And so I don't know who you are. So, we're going over to the juvenile hall. And she said she was going in her car to go to the mall one morning. And she said, I had my 8-year-old son and my husband and we just got in the car, went to the mall, and we live out in the country. So one of the roads, you can go pretty fast, like 60, 65 miles an hour. And as I'm going down the road, a car swerved, and a truck swerved and came straight at us and hit us head on, going the same speed. Took the top of my husband's head off, killed my 8-year-old instantly, and he was so drunk he didn't remember the accident. And she said, I would like to tell the kids at juvenile hall, please don't drink and drive. I don't care who you are, I don't care what you use, but don't get behind the wheel. And so we just thought, you know what, please join our team. And she's never been the same. The steering wheel embedded into her chest, caused a stroke, caused all kinds of other stuff, and she's still trying to heal from that. But she had a picture of her son, and her son at 8 years old was just he was starting to pick his own clothes, and he was this hip little kid. And so she had this picture, and she said, I just want to show these guys this picture of this kid that I will never hold again. And so she comes with us, and she's telling that story. And I mean, we had to bring counselors into the juvenile hall because people were really affected by what everybody was saying, but especially what this mother was saying. And Jim finally said for the first time in his life to anybody, I am so sorry. I have been behind the wheel, not even being able to see, and I've been driving. And I just want to tell you I'm sorry. And it really affected him. We're staying at the pastor's house during that trip. Jim was really uncomfortable around pastors or any normal people. But the pastor came in and decided he was going to witness to Jim. And I thought, how funny is that? I'm in the kitchen with the pastor's wife, and I hear the pastor say, Jim, you know, we all have things that we deal with. And Jim said, like, yeah? What do you deal with? And the pastor said, I didn't even know what to say. And he said, for the first time in my life, I thought I could lie to him and put out some really easy thing. I could tell him the truth. And this pastor had some very shameful behavior that he was lost in since he was a boy, young boy, that he's never told anybody. And he told Jim that moment, I have this. And can I tell him? Should I not tell him? He knows. He's like, don't tell him. Okay, so the pastor said, I have this. And Jim looked at him like, dude, don't tell that to anyone. You know? And he got up and just laughed. He was like, that's crazy. Don't share that stuff. But he went outside and he's smoking a cigarette and he's drinking drinking some coffee. And he's starting to get to him, the woman that talked, the pastor that has this thing that he's trying to deal with, where he thinks it's very shameful. Jim says that was minor compared to what he was doing. And so he's outside, and then we go to another event, and it's with a bunch of kids. And so the kids are talking about, you know, different things. And I think it was a Baptist group, and it was about 60 high school kids. And so they start telling stories. I said, do you know any stories in the Bible that just kind of talk about people at risk? And they start talking about different things, about David and about different people. And then they said, there's a guy, he was filled with like 1,000 demons, and he was just crazy. And then all the kids looked at Jim like, you could tell that it all was in their mind. And Jim, for some reason, because they wouldn't stop then, it was like they were telling these stories, almost like they were telling stories from Sunday school classes or Sabbath school classes, until they got to the demoniac and they realized that probably Jim is somewhat like the demoniac and he's in just as much trouble. These kids got very real, very connected with the Bible, very connected with the story. And they said, and it was so crazy because people kicked him out of town. He didn't have any friends. He was cutting on himself with stones. He was filled with so many addictions and demons that he couldn't even speak for himself. And every kid was going one by one, just talking about this story and the fact that Jesus, God himself, the Son of God, pulled every demon out of him, took him to the water, washed him, and he was in his right mind for the first time ever, and the power of God to change lives. But these kids were into it. They were into it. Finally, Jim starts crying. One girl says, is it time to pray for him? Yes, it is. And so they went up, and they put their hands on them, and these kids were bawling, praying for Jim. And it was so crazy. He did not accept Christ. He did not say anything. He just cried. They cried. He cried. And the next school I went to, I'm getting ready to be introduced. There's probably 900 students that are waiting. And I hear the guy starting to introduce me. And Jim says, Cheri, wait a minute. Before you go up, can you help me to accept Jesus? Oh, no. I said, no. I have to go, you know. And I thought, for somebody that does ministry, to say no at that moment, it's a weird thing. Because I should drop everything, right? And I couldn't. I mean, there's 900 kids. We're here for a reason. I said, Jim, you're going to have to hold that. And he's looking at me like, no, we got to do it now. I said, I just can't. So I went up, did the talk. I'm ADD. I don't know if you noticed that. But I come down, and Jim is standing there just anticipating something. I said, what? And he said, what? I want to accept Jesus. I said, oh, yeah. So we prayed, and it was such an incredible thing. Literally, we prayed, we talked about that, talked about what he was feeling. For the first time in his life, he had hope. Maybe I don't have to be this person forever. Maybe I actually can have a life. And so he talked a little bit about his background. And we started, in ministry, started watching his change. His change was not easy. I told him, you got to go see the pastor, because he wanted Bible studies. And I said, I had a pastor that was amazing, amazing. He didn't have any really experience with at-risk people, but he was really good with the Bible. So I said, this guy is really, really raw. He's still cussing, smoking his brains out. I mean, he's just not kind of the typical person you would send to the pastor, which we should, though. Raise your hand if you know I'm telling the truth. So I sent him to the pastor, and he comes back from the pastor's office, and he said, that was your pastor, that crazy guy? I said, crazy? That pastor is really conservative, just a nice guy. And he said, you know what he believes? It's so crazy, Cheri. He kept telling me, na, and it's in the Bible. I said, you want to see it from the Bible? And he says, you know what? I grabbed him by the neck at one point and just lifted it up. He said I was going to smash him in the face, but I thought, no, Cheri likes this guy. I read it on. He said, you know what? I just wanted to hit him. And if he said it was from the Bible one more time, I don't know if I could have controlled myself. And I said, what did he say to you? And he said, Cheri, you know the dude I accepted, Jesus? I said, yeah. He told me that dude was 3 dudes in one. And I had to say, hon, it's in the Bible. But, so he just had the worst time. I sent him he's single. So he said he wanted to meet other people that were Christian and single. He said, he sees the girl that does special music. She's like a violin player, and sees her, and he says, I want to marry someone like that. I'm thinking, this is a sweet little happiness girl that has never even been in the world for a day. And I'm thinking, hon, you're not ready for something like that. And so he's like, so we sent him to singles ministry. He goes to singles ministry, and they do icebreakers. Has anybody set up an icebreaker? For a bunch of addicts, icebreakers are just weird for us. But anyhow, so he goes to the singles group. They have an icebreaker, and one of the things was, if you look on the bottom of your plate, there's a star, and whoever gets the star gets a door prize. And so Jim, of course, everybody looked on the bottom of their plate. Jim got the star. And he threw his plate across the room, food going everywhere. And he said, what is this, a pity thing? You think I can't get a woman? And so somebody called me and said, Cheri, I think we offended Jim again. I'm like, how hard is that? So what was really interesting with Jim is at one point during that time, I took him to a church with me. And I'm going to give my testimony. I want Jim to go, and I want him to say a little bit about his story. He's still really raw. He doesn't really know how to act yet. He doesn't know. I mean, he really doesn't know. He's never had to hold back his anger, do any of that kind of stuff. If you offended him, he'll just smack you. It's like he just doesn't know how to deal with anything in life. And he's not high anymore. He's not using anymore. He's even trying not to smoke, so he's really grouchy. But anyhow, I take him to this church, and I think it's in Ohio. And so we're in this church, and beautiful church congregation. There was, I would guess, 300 people or so. And the pastor, I said, I'd like Jim to come up and speak a little bit. And they said, no, we really want you to speak. And I said, okay. And then the pastor's wife got up, and she had a gift for me. And she got up and told my entire testimony. And then handed me the gift. And I thought, well, I don't need to speak now. She just told the whole story. Let me get Jim up here. And so Jim got up, and he got up, and as he went to open his mouth, I was sitting like right here, as he went to open his mouth, he started crying and crying. And I thought, maybe he's not ready, right? Do I get up and rescue him and take it over? God said, no, sit down. Every woman in the room, after 10 minutes of crying, 10 minutes, imagine, 10 minutes, every woman in the room was almost on the edge of her seat. Like with Kleenex or with, can we have, the guys were like, oh my goodness, And the guys were like, you could tell that it was a little uncomfortable for the men. The women, we're rescuers anyway. We want to nurture and take care of everybody. And Jim just kept crying. And about 15 minutes into his crying or more, he starts talking about, I just thought about something When I was drinking, I was horrible. When I was using, I was horrible. I would beat my wife. I was abusive to my kids. And I just thought about an incident where I was out binging for 2 or 3 days. I came home. My wife gave me some lip. I beat her up. And my little baby, 9 months old, started screaming. And she was screaming and screaming and screaming. And he said, I kept yelling at her to shut up. Just shut up, and she wouldn't. I picked her up and I just shook her and said, shut up. And she cried even more, so I threw her across the room onto the bed and she kept screaming. He said, eventually I walked over, put a pillow over her face until she passed out so I could get some sleep. Nobody was saying anything in the congregation. I was stunned. And he said, and you know, the next thing I heard after I remembered that is God saying, and you are forgiven. And I love you. And Jim just cried again. He cried almost the entire time. And every time he remembered something that was horrible, that was what he did, is he felt like I heard God say, you are forgiven. You are forgiven. You are forgiven. And so what was powerful to me about Jim is the fact that he is not a nice guy, was not a nice guy, did some horrible things, and we have a God in heaven that says, I can change your life, and you are forgiven. One time I went out, I have a horse ranch, and I say a horse ranch for kids, and we work with foster kids and homeless kids. It is just my house. It's nothing big. It's no big deal. But so Jim was outside doing with the horses, because we just had a little horse born and stuff. And so he's outside, and he's just kind of hanging out. And I walked out and he said, Cheri, can I tell you something? Yeah. Will you not laugh at me? I said, is it funny? No, it's not funny. And I said, well, then I'm not going to laugh. And he said, you're going to laugh. I'm not telling you. It's okay. So no, I have to tell you. I want to tell you something. Don't laugh at me. And I said, Jim, is it funny? No, I told you no, it's not funny. Then I'm not laughing. I'm not crazy. That's debatable. But I'm not crazy. And he said, so he starts to tell me, and he said, I'm not telling you. You're going to laugh at me. I hate you. Well, you don't hate me. I know that. So what do you want to tell me? And he said, I'm not telling you. You're going to laugh at me. I said, Jim, just say it. I'm not going to laugh. And he said, okay. Do you think I'd make a good pastor? I could not stop laughing. I was on the ground, and I was laughing so hard that I looked at him, and he just wanted to kick me. He was so mad. Like, I knew you were going to laugh at me. What are you laughing about? And then I couldn't stop laughing. I don't know, as a kid, do you ever remember trying to stop laughing, and you cannot? I couldn't even breathe hardly. I was laughing so hard. And he was so mad. He was like pacing, and I knew you were going to laugh at me. I knew this was going to happen. And what's so funny about that? Why couldn't God use someone like me? And and finally I stopped and I said, Jim, what I'm laughing about is that when you came into my office looking crazy, telling me that you didn't want anything to do with God and all that stuff, I thought to myself, wouldn't it be funny if God makes this guy a pastor? And that's what I'm laughing about. And that's Tattoo Jim's story, brought to Christ by a 6-year-old little girl that said, do you know Jesus? And his whole journey has been incredible. Unfortunately, and the same, some people know me, some people don't, but I was homeless for 10 years as a kid. From the ages of 13 to 23, I was illiterate, functionally illiterate when I found God at 23 and strung out on heroin. I had teeth missing, I was 100 pounds. I was a mess. And when I came to church the first time, I was really lucky. I got stuck in my detox with an Adventist vegan vegetarian. I thought I was in hell, but it was really the best. I would ask for chocolate or coffee or Dr. Pepper, and she would say, can I get you some water? I would be going like, I want some coffee. I want something. But she was amazing. And she told me that when I was done doing detox, her husband was a dentist. He decided that he was going to give me teeth. I got beat up by a motorcycle gang. and some teeth got knocked out. Then he fixed my teeth. My entire face, after 10 years on the street and strung out on heroin, my jaw was rotted. Had to do a lot of stuff, packing the antibiotics into my jaw, trying to save that and all that stuff. So I really had a cool time. But he said after they were done, he said, you know what, you gotta find a church. And I came running into church. I just want you to imagine this. I came running into church. I had this beautiful little skirt. I had a lot of jewelry because it wasn't expensive stuff, but I thought I'd better put a lot of stuff on because I want you guys to think I am somebody. So I put earrings on, necklaces on, I had anklets on, I had rings on, I had this little tiny skirt on and this tight little vest with this little kind of shirt, and I was like, I just found Jesus. I like to worship with you guys. Is that all right? You know, and I did not know how to act. I did not know how to be. People looked at me like I was from Mars. Potluck, my first potluck. You guys are my family. You know that. We're the bride of Christ. You're my brothers and sisters, whether you want it to be or not. And so the first potluck, they said people bring stuff. I'm not a cook. I was homeless for 10 years. I just didn't get into cooking, but I made a pork roast that you would love. It was beautiful. And I put it in the middle of the table. And I was proud. I felt like Martha Stewart. You know, and somebody said, you're not Adventist, are you? No, I am. I love you guys, you know. And I did not know how to act. I didn't know how to do anything. Somebody decided to put me in a Bible study. So they put me in a class where they were studying timelines. I don't know how to read, right? I'm not going to figure that stuff out. I sat there, and for one, I wanted to shoot somebody because I thought, if I have to know this, maybe I just won't be saved. Maybe I'm not smart enough. Maybe I'm never going to get this. And so the guy that's teaching said, you know, we're going to start in Revelations, because they were doing Revelations in Daniel and showing some stuff. And so we're going to start in Revelations. Well, I don't know how to read. They gave me a Bible. So I said, okay, I'm ready. Go ahead. The guy stops. He's trying to hesitate for a minute. Revelations. I said, what? Revelation. And I'm thinking, are you trying to embarrass me? I'm just curious. Because you need to get on with class. And he said again, Revelation. So I thought maybe I just got to go to another part. So I go like this. Okay, I'm ready. Go ahead. And he said, Revelations. And I thought, don't make me hate you. Let's go on. I was homeless for 10 years and survived the street. You don't have a chance. And I was so mad because I don't know what Revelations is. I don't know what any of that stuff is. I could barely read. I could read second grade level. So when you start talking timelines and all that stuff, I have no idea. I remember going home, and because now I have a home, I have an apartment, I have a beach chair, a spider plant, and I got my first set of silverware ever in my life that all matched, and I wept like a baby putting them away, thinking that, God, you are so good to me, and I had nothing. And I remember thinking that I will never make it. I can't even go to a church and go into a Bible study group because I don't know what they're saying. And I wept and wept and wept. God gave me a vision, and I think He's really incredible to us. And He gave me a vision on what the whole Day of Atonement meant, what happened during that time, what they're talking about when they were talking about that I got so lost in. And I thought, that is so incredible that God would take an illiterate heroin addict from the street and say, don't worry, I can teach you in a day what it's taken a man a lifetime to learn. And so I really started having faith in God, that God is going to lead me, even if nobody knows how to talk to me. Finally, after about, man, I don't think anybody really knew how to talk to me for, and close to, I would hate to tell you the truth, because the truth even makes me cry when I say it now, but about 10 years. I am a rejected kid. My mom had me when she was a kid. She tried to self-abort a number of times. She had 5 kids before she was 21. My dad died in a crack house. My grandparents are alcoholics. And my whole life, I wanted to be loved. My whole life. I wanted to sit next to my mom. my whole life, and she did not know how to do that. She would tell me, if I hung on her, she would tell me, why are you always so needy? Why do you always need attention? And I would just cry like, I don't know. And when I got into the church, what happened is I still didn't get anyone to say, come sit by me. Just come sit by me. And it was killing me. I could dress like everyone else in the room. I could look like everyone else in the room. But all I needed was someone to touch me and say, welcome to the family. Welcome home. And I just died. The pastor sometimes will talk about love and loving one another, and we're the family of God. And I would want to grab the mic and say, you know what? Today it's really tough for me not to go home and just kill myself. I am so lonely. I am so lost. I asked one time I thought, maybe somebody could teach me normal stuff. And so I bought a sewing machine. Because I went back to school, I learned to read, I got a nursing license, I started working in hospitals in town. I mean, my life was going really well. And I walked into church and I bought the sewing machine, and I said, if anybody knows how to sew, I would love to learn, because I didn't have a grandmother or mother that did any of that stuff. And so I got a sewing machine, and man, if anybody would do that for me, that'd be great. That sewing machine sat in the box for 17 years. 17 years. I finally have learned to sew a little. Not much, and my husband would laugh if he heard me say that, but a little bit. But it's like I couldn't find a way to engage. Right before I left the church after 10 years, someone said that, Cheri, I know why you're such a mess. And I thought, really? My dad started molesting me when I was 3 months old. My Child Protective Services tried to remove us from the home all the time. We were the kids that nobody let anybody play with because our parents were drug addicts. I mean, so when she said, I know why you're such a mess, I thought, why is that? And she said, well, you just don't eat right. I thought, really? So if I have brown rice, I'm going to be fine, And so anyhow, so I said, okay, so if I don't eat right, what do I do? What if she's telling the truth? This whole thing boils down to my what I put in my mouth. And I said, what do I do? And she said, well, you take a class. So I went to a class. And please hear this. I'm kind of a little bit of a house nut now, so I'm not putting that down at all. But I go to this class, and I'm sitting in the front row, not because of any other reason. I'm ADD. I get distracted really easily. And if this is going to change my life, I want to hear every word, right? So I'm in the front row, and this guy jogs in, and it was at a church, Sacramento, that holds about 1,000 people. I mean, it's a huge church, and it was packed. And he comes jogging in, and he was this gay guy. I thought that was kind of funny. And so he, and I won't tell you his name because you would know it, and I don't know if anybody knows that he's gay. But so anyhow, so he jogs in, and he goes up front, and he starts talking about eating right. He talks about the health message. He was a triathlon athlete. He's won a lot of awards. He talked about that for a little while. And so I'm listening to all that, and then he said, if you've had a hamburger, you might as well have gone to Mustang Ranch. And some people don't know what Mustang Ranch is. I do. It's a brothel in Nevada. And so then he said, if you've had a hamburger, you might as well have killed somebody. No. And I remember in the front row feeling like the only thing that's saving me in my life is God. The only hope I have is the fact that I have a God that is crazy about me. And it's ridiculous how much he loves me. I feel like some days he wakes me up and just wants to kiss me on the face and show me something that I hadn't seen. He is the best father I have ever had. And so, but I felt like he was literally kind of ripping that away from me. And so finally I just had enough, and I raised my hand. Because I looked around first at everybody. I thought, does everybody believe that? Do you believe that? And do you believe that for somebody? I just got back from McDonald's. I smell like a hamburger, And I'm thinking, so I got my hand up. I think he's scared. He's not calling on me. I put my other hand up, Got tired. I don't know how long that went on, but finally he said, you know what? And I said, does the Bible talk about pride anywhere? Because if one sin is no different than another, I think you're in trouble. And I didn't call him out on the gay thing. I thought that would be a little mean, but, you know, he was talking about all his awards again, and I said, you know, it might be a good time for me to leave because everybody got really quiet. And I walked out and I went home and I cried. I mean, snot dripping out of my face, kind of crying. And I thought, who am I to think that I would ever be good enough to sit in this building with you guys? Who am I to think that the God of heaven would ever look at someone like me and say, welcome home, good and faithful servant? Who am I to think that, you know? And I just wept. I mean, I wept. And God gave me a vision. And I think I'm so grateful for him when he does that. Somebody said, was it an acid flashback or something? No, it was a vision. And so he showed me a time that I was 14 years old. I was living in a drug house and strung out on heroin. We were out of drugs. Somebody was making a run to bring some drugs back. Everybody was kind of quiet because we're withdrawing and all that stuff. They brought the drugs back. We cooked up and did everything that we needed to do and slammed the drugs. It was more potent than what I was used to. I put too much in my veins and I immediately went out. They had to do CPR and all that kind of stuff. I don't remember a thing from what happened, but what God showed me is exactly what happened. My friends tried to do CPR. Now, does anybody think they were CPR certified? They were not. They were drug addicts. When you die and you go into seizures, you can lose bowel and bladder control. I lost bowel and bladder control. I threw up all over the place. They had to put me in the shower because it was the cleanest place to drag me. They put ice cubes all over me and in me and that kind of stuff. My girlfriend had to argue a bit because when I started to throw up and they knew that they had to breathe for me again, nobody wanted to, right? And so finally she said she's going to die, and so literally just removed the vomit from my face and breathed for me. I survived that, obviously, but what was interesting is when I survived that, the next question I had for her, did you steal my drugs when I was out? Because that's all I was concerned about. I didn't remember the incident, but what God showed me is everything that happened to me during that scene. And I felt like I could see it, I could smell it, it felt like I experienced it. And he said so lovingly, Cheri, I loved you as much when you were laying in a drug house in an overdose in your own feces as I do right now when you're trying to figure out how to be a Christian. I am your father. Do not make this a behavioral thing. I will get you home. And so what I learned in my early walk is I have a dad, I have a God that says I know everything about you. I know the most disgusting things about you. I know the best things about you. And I know who you are the day after resurrection. When this whole thing is over, I know who I created you to be. And don't get lost here. Don't get offended. Don't run. Don't try to puff up for anybody and don't shrink for anyone. I am a child of God, loved beyond what I can imagine, and that's the only thing that is saving my life. Saved Jim's life. And there are people that we saw all week. I'm so proud of you guys. You put us in front of people that you have no idea. One girl's father is a drug addict, horrible drug addict. Her mother is schizophrenic, in and out of mental health institutes, and she's trying to raise herself and stay in high school. And she's so afraid. I have no one that loves me. I have nowhere to go. I'm afraid I'm going to be crazy like my mom or strung out like my dad, and I am scared. So you really put us in front of people like that. We had one guy that just got out of jail that's going to see his kids today or yesterday for the first time since he's been in prison. And he says, I've been in prison, they're in foster care, and I am scared to death. And to be able to grab his face and say, you know what, regardless of what you've done, you will always be their father. And they, even if they have to be angry at you now, change their life, they love you. They need their dad. They need you to be in recovery. And for us to be in front of people like that is amazing. One of the things that hurts me the most, and we're going to talk about it this afternoon, is that there's a lot of times that we want to go out in the community. And most of the time when we go out in the community, we're not going to find kids like me. I ended up on the streets of Los Angeles homeless at 13 years old. And at the time I ended up on the streets, there were 80,000 kids like me. So when somebody says my story is unusual, major cities, my story is usual. I was picked up in 24 hours and funneled into a multi-million-dollar industry. And what I learned about life is pretty dark. What I learned about our addictions is pretty dark. But what I learned about God is He's going to redeem all of that. And so we have to have safe buildings for people to come into. If we're going to go out in the community, if we're going to talk to anybody, if we're going to say, please come and sit by me, we're going to have to mean it. We really are going to have to mean it. They don't want a Bible study yet. They want someone to say, I'm glad you're alive. They want someone to say, man, I'm sorry for what happened to you, but there is a God that has wept for you. And just come in, sit down, come in. Most people will say, I don't know if I want people like that in the building. Raise your hand if you know I'm telling the truth. I don't know. You know, that's a bit much. And we have said that for years and years and years. And you know what's happened? Because the enemy is very strategic. We don't have people like that in the building, but we're starting to get people like that in our family. Because it's encroaching on all of us. If we don't do something, it will literally invade us in a different way. It will be our kids. It will be our spouse. It will be our addiction. Raise your hand if you have a porn addiction. I just love saying that. But, you know, so what happens is that literally we have an enemy that's very strategic. And so he says, you know, I'll step in a different way. So the only choice that we have, we've been given a commission. And the commission is that we are ambassadors for Christ. It says in 2 Corinthians 5:17, for one, we're new. I am completely new. I can stand up and tell you my story because I am not that kid. I am not that rejected kid. I am not that abused kid. I am not that kid that acted out in all of those ways. Who I am right now is a woman of God, deeply loved. And I really want to be a part of whatever God does here. And so we are new creatures in Christ. He's given us a new mind and a new heart and all that stuff. But he says, I've called you to be ambassadors for me, as if I was talking to the world through you, pleading with them, be reconciled to God, right? But we can't do that from the building. They're not going to come in the building. They don't care what you're doing here. They really want you to seek after them, to seek and save the lost. That's what we're here for. And so when I heard and saw what you guys did, I just want to say, I'm so proud of you. And to the extent, who's going to be involved in the 14-week program? Okay, it's incredible. Only about 2% of anybody that you will attract to that program is going to be a mess like me. The most are going to be just normal folks that deal with divorce and eating stuff, workaholism and that kind of stuff. But the average person is going to be normal. You have a couple people like me in your group. But when you learn friendship ministry, you'll learn how to talk to anybody. You'll learn how not to give advice, not to jump right into a Bible study or try to get them in the baptismal pool. That won't happen. Because people, once they see God, they'll jump in that water whether you want them to or not. You know, but friendship ministries is what you're going to start doing in the church, and it is life-changing. It's life-changing for us because it's a thing that when I saw our church is amazing. Our health message is amazing. What we believe about God and the gospel is amazing. But what we don't know how to do is friendship. And we could do friendship with each other, but with people that are really different than us. Does that make sense? It's difficult. And so once we learn how to do it, we are so good at it. And so this group was written, and it took me a while to write this, but this group was written for people to learn how to just be friends with people that are really different than you. I'd like to turn it back over to you. And does anybody have a question or a comment? Does anybody want to say anything? Do I? Do I want a man? Thank you.
For your adult.
I'm going to beg somebody to say something. Go ahead. Give me a kiss. It's not.
Over the years, I felt guilty because I had